Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here today. Our first panelist today is Andrew Brandt. Andrew Brandt is a professor at Villanova Law and the executive director of the Moorad Center for Sports Law. Before he immersed himself in the sports law world, Professor Brandt played tennis at Stanford University and continued his education at Georgetown Law. Now he is a nationally recognized sports executive, having experience as an agent in various sports, as the VP of the Green Bay Packers, and as a columnist for Sports Illustrated. Thank you, Professor Brandt, for being here today.
Our next panelist today is Professor Shea Rhodes. Professor Rhodes, in addition to being a graduate of Villanova Law School, is the co-founder and director of the Villanova Law Institute to address commercial sexual exploitation. Prior to forming the CSE Institute in 2014, Professor Rhodes served the Philadelphia community as an assistant district attorney. Currently, she is a national expert on laws and policies related to sex trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, and prostitution. She is also a member of several anti-trafficking initiatives, locally and internationally, including Philadelphia's Anti-Trafficking Coalition, the Pennsylvania Anti-Human Trafficking Advocacy Work Group, and Shared Hope International's Just Response Council. Thank you, Professor Rhodes, for being here today.
Deshaun Watson, the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, is now suspended from the team. Professor Brandt, can you tell us how that happened?
Okay. Good afternoon, and thanks to Kim Madden and the Alumni Association, and thanks to Jacqueline and Rachel. Definitely the best moderators are our students, and these are best of the students we got. I'm proud to represent the Moorad Center and sit along with Shea to give you this CLE, which I hope you find informative and interesting, which I think and hope you will. Deshaun Watson is a name that has resonated throughout sports over the past couple of years, a lot of it for reasons that are not great, a lot of it for reasons that have been debated and continue to be debated. He was a star quarterback coming into the NFL out of Clemson, where he won national championships and played for the Houston Texans a couple of years before he had a dispute with the team at the beginning of 2021 for reasons that we still don't really know. He didn't want to play there, and we find out that over the year before, during the pandemic, there was some behavior that came out, of course, after 2020 into 2021. Deshaun Watson was reported in many instances to have received solicited massages where he wanted more than massages. This went on for a period of 17 months, according to reporting, and for reasons that probably had to do with that more than anything else, he did not play with his team, the Houston Texans, in 2021. There was no suspension, there was no discipline, he wasn't on any kind of reserve list, he wasn't on a suspended list, he wasn't even on an injured list. But this went on for the entire season last year, where he was a member of the Houston Texans, who were in desperate need of a good quarterback, yet he didn't play. In my opinion, what had gone on was conversations between Watson's representatives and the Houston Texans saying, just be quiet and go away and we'll pay you. He was paid his full salary, over $10 million, during 2021 to not play for the Houston Texans. Now, during the season, there were rumors. There's a trade deadline in the NFL every year. It comes around Halloween, early November. There were plenty of rumors that teams might trade for Deshaun Watson in 2021, back a year ago. It didn't come to fruition for reasons we're finding out now about all of these situations. As for those situations, they morphed into lawsuits. So over a period of time, there were not, I believe, 25 civil lawsuits against Deshaun Watson. Women experiencing the same situation, where they were hired for massage and it turned into something else. This has been exposed as a pattern of his behavior, again, over a 17-month period. Let's bring it a little closer to the present before we get to the whole disciplinary. I'll stop after this. In March of 2022, an extraordinary event happened. In part, and I believe in good part, this is why it is so counterintuitive, in good part to his own bad behavior, he became the most sought-after player in the NFL. What do I mean by that? His team, the Houston Texans, wanted no more of Deshaun Watson. They wanted no part of him. So he became up for essentially an auction. And because NFL teams are so desperate to fill that position with a young, ascending, productive player, teams fell over themselves to recruit and sign this player with all the history that I just spoke of. Several teams had to go through the Houston Texans and first be pre-approved with draft choice compensation, which included 3 first-round draft picks. Once they were pre-approved for that, they could talk to Watson and his representatives. It was reported that the New Orleans Saints and Atlanta Falcons were the finalists. He's a Southern kid. He's from that area. He was supposedly very interested in those 2 teams. He'd eliminated the 2 other teams that were in the final group, the Carolina Panthers and the Cleveland Browns. One day, at the end of March, we have news. Not only are the Browns not out of it, but they got him. And how did they get him? Well, they gave him the best contract in the history of the NFL, and it's not even close. $230 million, fully secured, fully guaranteed, and no financial loss from a suspension. It's an extraordinary contract, and it has reverberated around the NFL. But as we come up to the disciplinary part of Deshaun Watson, I wanted to paint the picture of this guy with all the behavior, now the highest paid player in the NFL. I'll leave it there for now.
So you said you wanted to talk about the new disciplinary system. Why did it change, and what does it look like?
People who know NFL discipline have often referred to this commissioner discipline. Commissioner Roger Goodell, a lot of people know as this judge, jury, and executioner, where he has imposed discipline for off-field behavior. And when it has been appealed, he is also the one hearing the appeal. So again, think of how strange that is. He gives the discipline, then they appeal, then he usually says, yeah, I agree with that discipline, I gave it. It changed in the most recent collective bargaining agreement in 2020. There's a couple twists. So now there is not a disciplinary officer named the commissioner. It is someone that is jointly selected by the union, the NFL Players Association, and the league. So the jointly selected arbitrator imposing discipline is a difference than from the past. All right? It's not someone with the NFL. It's someone jointly picked by the union and the league. Still, however, either side has appeal rights. And guess who they appeal to? Commissioner Goodell. So, here's what happened in a nutshell. In late June, there was a 3-day hearing. And it was the NFL presenting their witnesses about what Deshaun Watson did to these women. It was the NFLPA, the Players Association, and Watson's bevy of attorneys presenting why he should not be disciplined. And there was an opinion written by this jointly selected disciplinary officer who is a former judge from Delaware named Judge Sue Robinson. Robinson's decision was, as many of you know, a 6-game suspension. The season, as you know, is 17 games. It was a 6-game suspension. The NFL, as their right, appealed. They obviously wanted longer. We heard they wanted a full year and more of banishing him from the NFL. The appeal process goes, as I said, back to Roger Goodell or his designated appeal officer. He chose a former attorney general from New Jersey named Peter Harvey. Peter Harvey never ruled in the case because, as we now know, there was a settlement. The NFLPA and Deshaun Watson settled with the NFL on an agreed suspension of 11 NFL games this season. Deshaun Watson will play this year. He will return in November. He is now out of the league, obviously, for these 11 first games of the season. It is a settlement. This was not imposed by the appeal officer. This is clearly more than almost twice as much as the 6-game suspension, but as we'll talk about, a lot of people are unhappy that it was not a year or longer. But as we sit here today, Deshaun Watson is on his, 4th game of an 11-game suspension.
So how would you compare Watson's discipline to other NFL players that had similar allegations, such as Ben Roethlisberger, Ezekiel Elliott, Kareem Hunt, and why is their discipline similar or dissimilar to Watson's?
Yeah, as I've said all the summer, I'm shocked at both decisions because I thought there was no way in God's green earth that this player would see the field this season. Jacqueline referenced some precedent. We're lawyers here. We look at precedent, and the precedent for players was Ben Roethlisberger caught in a bathroom with a woman doing who knows what, 1 woman, 6-game suspension. Ezekiel Elliott, former girlfriend, 1 woman, 6-game suspension. Kareem Hunt, Kansas City Chiefs, Cleveland Browns, 1 woman, 8-game suspension. And of course, Ray Rice, as we know, indefinite suspension for what he did and what was caught on video. Now we're dealing with 20-something women. We're dealing with a pattern behavior. I thought this has to be a year plus. Of course, there's representation on the other side, and this is what they came out with. I'm surprised at the level of discipline because of what I just talked about. It's not a full year. He will return this year. That's where we are. It was a process that the NFL, we can speculate in a little bit as to why the NFL didn't push this and not settle. I have my thoughts, and I'm sure Shea does as well. So that's where we are. I'm shocked by the lack of adherence to precedent, considering the number of women and the pattern of behavior over 17 months.
Is there anything that stuck out to you in Judge Robinson's opinion that particularly you found different from all these other people?
Yeah, the reason she was limiting it to a 6-game suspension at the time she did agree that it was predatory. She did agree that it was a pattern. She did agree that it was egregious. She did agree that he violated all personal conduct policies of the NFL. She did agree with all of that. What this case turned on was the word nonviolent. Unlike Ray Rice, unlike Kareem Hunt, unlike Ezekiel Elliott, she termed this action nonviolent, and basically said, looking at her view of precedent, when there's been nonviolent activity towards a woman, the maximum suspension's been something like 3 games. So again, I am not an expert like my colleague here, but it did seem strange to me that this was termed nonviolent. The other thing that struck me in her opinion was she said that if he is found to have received massage from therapists outside of his team, he cannot be reinstated. So it was really a no outside massage clause in the opinion that struck me. She doesn't even trust him with any masseuse beyond the team therapist, yet it was only a 6-game suspension.
So now with the disciplinary action in place, how is Watson's contract affected with the Browns?
The Browns sold their soul for this player. He has a $45 million signing bonus that's not affected by the suspension. That's rare. I did contracts for 10 years in the NFL. I would never do that in a contract. They specifically wrote that if you sign this contract, we will not take away money due to suspension. No other team would do that. That's how desperate they were to sign this player, even with all the baggage. So I think this contract will resonate. Owners are always going to say that's an outlier contract, whether, we're going through this with Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, and he wants something like that. Not so much that clause, but the amount of money and the security and the protections and the guarantees, and owners are fighting this. But it's an extraordinary contract that is really, in my opinion, a really bad look for the Cleveland Browns.
Following Watson, has the league taken any action towards addressing issues involving violence and harassment against women?
It's hard to say. It's so early in the process since the discipline. We're going to have to see how the NFL reacts to that. I know people watch the NFL and they see the pink wristbands and the pink shoes during the month of October for breast cancer awareness month. We're going to have to see the reaction to people in light of what's going on with Watson. I think Watson is not only an 11-game suspension. Obviously, there's a lot in there about treatment, about rehab, about counseling. He will not be reinstated if he comes back with the same attitude that he had when he left. That's going to be up to counselors to validate his return and psychologists. So I think it's going to be a test case. And the NFL, as everyone knows, always has a new issue every week, so people turn away from this one pretty quickly. But I think it will linger, and with this hanging over sports in general, we've seen what's happened recently with the Phoenix Suns owner and the Boston Celtics coach, etc. This continues to resonate.
So I just want to jump back to the characterization of this conduct as nonviolent. Professor Rhodes, do you have thoughts on that characterization of this conduct?
I have so many thoughts about so many things in this case. First, I want to say thank you to Kim and the Alumni Office for including me in this conversation, and to Rachel and Jacqueline to moderating us. I think our students here at Villanova Law are exceptional, and I am thrilled to be part of educating the future lawyers. I want to start, before I answer that question, Rachel, by quoting from Tony Porter. I think he is phenomenal. He's an author, an educator, he's an activist, and he's working as the CEO of an organization called A Call to Men. And this really resonates with me. He says, the large majority of men in our society are nonviolent. We believe that it's the responsibility of those men to challenge the minority of men who are violent while raising a generation of healthy and respectful boys who also promote nonviolence. And I believe that with my whole heart, right? The majority of men that I know, the boys that are being raised in this world, are nonviolent, and it is incumbent upon them to call out instances. We'll just refer to them sort of globally as sexual misconduct. It could be anything from inappropriate word choices and phrases and things said to just actual violence, like rape. So what do I think of Judge Robinson's comment of referring to his actions in this case as being nonviolent? Well, I think it's just probably a lack of education of what violence is. You have physical violence, and this is what I think she was, sort of hanging her hat on. Physical violence. And when it comes to instances of sexual violence, that becomes, leading to injuries, something that an individual would have to go to an emergency room for, where there might be scarring or bruising, or someone might need stitches. And the reality, at least for me, and having spent a decade as a prosecutor, and now working as a decade in the world of anti-trafficking and exploitation, where individuals have exited prostitution, the majority of the violence is something that none of us can see. It's the violence that's happened inside. It's the trauma that is subjective. every single person in this room, out there on Zoom in this world, is carrying around a backpack. We all have a trauma backpack. And for these particular women to have been told that the trauma they experienced was nonviolent because it didn't result in any physical injury needing medical attention is just lack of education on what trauma is and how, again, these women's trauma backpacks are really, really full, and they're gonna have to carry that around with them forever. I think it was uneducated, and in my opinion, really a slap in the face to the victims in this case.
I think one of the main questions that a lot of people have regarding this case is, with so many victims, why did some of them wait to come forward, or this chain reaction of one victim coming forward and then more coming forward as a result of that? In your experience, why do women wait to come forward? And is that something that is common?
Sure, I think all of you can also tell that I'm a former prosecutor and I prepared my case here. The majority of women don't come forward for many reasons, and RAINN, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, keeps statistics on this, and there's of the cases that are not reported, and we say to police, right, because it's to law enforcement, 20% feared retaliation. And I think that's a really big reason why women don't come forward. I think there's also shame, self-blame, societal perception. 8% who didn't report believed it was not important enough to report. 2% didn't believe the police could do anything to help. And 30% gave just no reason. They chose to report for one reason or another and just didn't choose to give a particular reason. But I really think that fear of retaliation is evident in this particular case. And I'm just going to show you a couple of reasons why that's true. And I want to thank Rachel and the students who are the interns in the Institute for screenshotting these. What do we have here? Yeah. And I know that Andrew has had his fair share of trolls coming after him on social media as well. I'm going to leave this one here because I think that is a question that Rachel might ask me in a little while. But I think that the fear of retaliation and not coming forward is borne out by what we have just seen. And these are just snippets. I went down a rabbit hole one night. I wish I hadn't. I did. But again, these are just snippets of what society thinks of the women who came forward. And I also want to be clear. There are 66 identified women. There have been 24 lawsuits against Deshaun Watson. 23 of them have settled. 30 cases were settled by the Texans. 6 women's cases were settled before a complaint ever even hit a docket. So that's 6 additional women beyond the original 24. The one woman, her name's Lauren, and she's public, who has decided not to settle at this point, has said, I don't want to settle because there are no consequences. There's no acknowledgement that anything happened, and there is no guarantee that something like this isn't going to happen in the future. And the demographics of the women that we know are 15 of them were Black women, 4 of them were white women, and 3 of them are Hispanic. So we know Lauren, who I just spoke of, who won't settle her case for the reasons I stated, she's white. The only other victim who has publicly come forward and identified herself, her name is Ashley. She's Hispanic. Both of those women were licensed massage therapists, and both are no longer working in their chosen profession.
Speaking of the societal reaction that we see in these tweets and on social media, a lot of them have been referring to the victims as prostitutes or sex workers, and this idea that happy endings are not illegal legally. Is any of that correct?
So, happy endings are not illegal, let's be clear, unless you pay for them. And then they are illegal in all 50 states, yes, including the state of Nevada. But purchasing sex is illegal in the state of Texas, and in September of 2021, it became a felony in the state of Texas to buy sex, even on a first offense. But let's talk about word choice. I think as lawyers and future lawyers, the words that we use matter and are really important. So, yes, prostitution is a crime, the sale of sex is a crime, but think about that word prostitute. It's as though it's othering an individual. She's not worthy or he's not worthy because she's just a prostitute and she doesn't matter. And here's some proof right here, again, gathered off of social media. And you can say it's part of the retaliation, but just that someone who might be in prostitution or selling sex doesn't matter. And while you read these, I talk a lot about prostitution and buying sex and sex trafficking and exploitation in my professional life. And for those of you who know me, you will know that I rarely ever use the term John, right? Sort of like a John Doe, an anonymous person who purchases sex. Again, words matter. And I refer to individuals who buy sex as sex buyers. So again, women are primarily impacted in the sex trade worldwide, and that word prostitute has a really negative and shameful connotation that goes along with it. I can't see these, and the sun is in my eyes. Am I at the end of them? I'm onto the good ones. Okay. Well, we'll just leave it at that for now.
Professor Brandt talked a lot about Deshaun Watson's pattern of behavior. Is the way that Deshaun Watson sought out these women common for perpetrators of sexual exploitation?
Well, I think that's a layered question, Rachel. First and foremost, I had the pleasure of serving at the request of Governor Wolf for a year on our state board of massage therapy. I served out the term of an individual who had to step down. And I can tell you that during that time I was on the state board, the majority of individuals who are licensed are women who are just small business owners. And that's something else that I think the public really needs to be aware of. Yes, there are illicit massage businesses. Yes, happy endings came to be a phrase associated with illicit massage businesses, but the majority of people who work in massage chose that as a healing profession, and they want to help others heal. Deshaun Watson had, 1 million amenities provided to him by the Texans and throughout his career, including massage therapists on staff by his teams. So I would suggest that not only was he using this ruse of needing massage and being predatory, but this had absolutely nothing to do with sex in the first place. It has to do with power and control. And he was deliberately choosing women of color who were either, on their way to being licensed or not licensed. Many were licensed, and saying, I'm a big believer in promoting, Black-owned businesses. And there's such a huge power imbalance, right, between perpetrators and victims that is so evident in this case. And again, if they're associated with this term prostitute, which I don't believe any of these women were whatsoever, there's also this connotation that, well, she's not worthy of belief. So when one woman comes forward and says, hey, I was just trying to do my job, and I was doing so under the trickery, because let's be clear, he tricked them, that he would help promote their businesses. One woman has the courage to come forward. It doesn't shock me that additional women came forward as well.
Just to follow up there, and by the way, I need to say a word for CLE. Football.
He stole my word.
I'll give you another one. I want to follow up what Shea said, what Rachel was asking about these massages. Listen, there's no doubt here what was going on, and I don't know what kind of rationalization was going on from Watson's side in all of this, because having worked at a team for 10 years, we had massage therapists either at the employ of the team or ones that we highly recommended for players to use. Having been around players for 30 years and representing them, there's usually one or two massage therapists and or chiropractor and or acupuncture, whatever it may be, that players rely on. And very important to have these people around them. As Shea said, the Texans are no different. They had in-house massage therapists. They had, if not, people that they highly recommend their players use, and Deshaun Watson knows teammates that could have recommended. Again, it's a different kind of, because these guys are so big and so muscular, it does take maybe a different type of massage therapist, and they are on staff or easily found. That's why this was so unique. Not only is he soliciting dozens of strangers through Instagram, but obviously he has a pattern of behavior where he shows up with a towel that's not their towel, and he asks for work on his private parts. All these kind of things are just over and over again found to be his pattern of behavior. So it was so different. I think in the process, what the union and Watson's attorneys tried to do was say to the NFL or say to the judge, the retired judge, hey, we're not excusing what he did, but hey, your owners, NFL, have been caught in some compromising positions, and they have not been disciplined at all. Referring to the Patriots owner who was caught in a similar situation once in Florida, referring to the Washington Commanders owner who's presided over a toxic workplace for decades, referring to the Cowboys owner who's had some issues, referring to whatever it may be. So again, it almost seems like this defense, because a lot of people are asking, like, what is he saying in this hearing? Like, he did try to say that he was just, getting massage, and that didn't fly. But again, these are the kind of defenses they put up. But anyone who knows sports knows that, high-performance elite athletes don't seek out their body work on Instagram, with a lot of women that weren't even licensed.
This whole situation raises a lot of moral and ethical issues, so I'll throw this question out to both of you. To what extent should lawyers and attorneys direct the moral policies of the organizations that they represent?
So, there isn't an ethical rule that applies that you have to direct, as lawyers, right, that we have to direct the policies of organizations that, lawyers do represent as general counsel. I think that there is a real opportunity to be proactive in assisting and advising clients like an NFL or the teams on what they are going to stand for and what they are going to tolerate among the players, just like any business, right? What are we as a society going to tolerate from people who work in companies that we own? And in this, in the area that I work in, there's a big push now to get businesses and law firms to sign on to employee policies that if you are caught buying sex on company time, you will no longer be our employee. And what does company time mean, right? Thinking about times when, as an attorney, I travel a lot for work, and I expense my hotel room. So if a lawyer is working for a large law firm and he's expensing the hotel room when he flew into Chicago to depose clients or, an opposing party in a lawsuit, and the client is picking up that bill, what does that say if he decides to purchase sex, again, on time, that is off the clock? He's not still in the deposition, but he's still there. And so I think, again, as, businesses involved in good business practices and wanting to really send a message to employees about what we should and should not tolerate as society, it sends a really big message. And I think there's a way that, lawyers can advise their clients. Clients don't always take our advice, right? But, there's a way to get out ahead of things and be proactive in stopping behavior before it ever even starts, like purchasing sex.
I think there's a real, when we talk about the world of sports, we talk about this among my students, a lot of it here from my class, is where's the line we want to draw between discipline on the field, on the court, on the diamond, on the ice, versus off. And I know there are people out there, because they've come and talked to me about it, where they say, listen, I don't care. I just want to see them play. They're entertainment. Whatever they do in their off time is their business. And I think that's a problem because we live in a society that pays an extraordinary amount of attention to these athletes, and our children do. And this is something where behavior becomes a beacon, especially in a league like the NFL, where they average 15 million viewers every game. This is something that every team, every league, every agent, every organization in all sports goes through. Where is the dividing line between talent and character? Of course, if Deshaun Watson was an average player, we wouldn't be having this CLE. We wouldn't be talking about him. He would have been released. He would never play again. But now we have an extraordinary talent who did this. And yes, I talked about the Panthers and the Saints and the Falcons and, of course, the Browns, but there's 28 other teams that wanted no part of them, no matter the talent. And I think Shea just said something really important. What are your principles? What do you stand for? And you saw some of the images of Browns fans. Listen, I get it. Fandom is a powerful drug. It really is. We know that. We're Eagles fans, right? But where do you stand? Where do you draw the line? Where do you want to put your organization? I went through many conversations in my time with the Packers about bringing in players with rap sheets, with problems in the past. And it becomes a discussion. Like, we know we're not here teaching 7th grade boys choir, but what do we do? What do we do with a player that's extremely talented but has character issues, that has a rap sheet, that's done bad things? Again, 20-something teams would not touch Deshaun Watson, who's an extraordinary talent. They have principles that kept them away from him. But all he needed was one, and he got 4, and he's decided on Cleveland. So these are extraordinary decisions, and this goes beyond sports, as everyone here knows. There's greater tolerance for greater talent. See that in business, see that in law, see that in medicine, see that all over the world. You will tolerate more in behavior if there's extraordinary talent.
You guys both talked about the quantity of women who accused Watson of sexual assault, but only 4 women testified. What are both of your explanations for this discrepancy?
I kind of queried about that to the people involved as much as they would tell me, and I think it was, to some extent, from the league point of view, a respect for the process of Judge Robinson not to be there for 2 weeks. It was, as I said, a 3-day hearing, and I believe there were 4 or 5 women chosen, and I think the decision was made, these are the most egregious cases, rather than parade 20-something women through that hearing. So they chose what they thought were the most egregious cases, most egregious in terms of details, most egregious in terms of predatory actions by Watson. And yeah, you can look back and say, did they present the entire picture? I'm not sure. If they chose the ones that were the most illustrative of predatory behavior, that was their decision.
So again, I think it's a slap in the face to the victims. If they wanted to testify, they should have been heard. I know that there are a lot of people out there in the world who talk about, oh, I want to be the voice for the voiceless. Everyone has a voice. Sometimes they just don't have a platform from which to be heard. And I think if given an opportunity for those of us like lawyers who have privilege, right? We have an education to give our clients who don't have the ability to project what it is that they want to say, that we should allow them the opportunity to say so. But I'm going to, again, back to I prepped my case for today. The attorney, I forget his first name, Busby, who represents the victims in the civil litigation, said this about the NFL investigation. And this is a quote. From the beginning, when the first questions asked by the NFL investigators of our clients was, what were you wearing? That gave us a lot of pause. Some of the interviews spent most of the time on a deep dive of the victim and little to no questions about the conduct that was being alleged. In some cases, it was our view, when the questioners weren't being aggressive and hostile, they really weren't that interested in what was being said or what actually happened. So I take a couple of things away from this. Number one, wow, back to the classic victim shaming, victim blaming that I was hoping the Me Too movement over the last few years would really rectify and correct, but obviously not. I would say, having been a prosecutor, that I would expect this type of nonsense from a showboat criminal defense attorney, who I love and many of my friends. But first and foremost, these investigators weren't trauma-informed. And that's a huge problem. The NFL chose their investigators. And they clearly chose investigators to ask questions in a hostile fashion because they weren't trauma-informed. Something that's really important to me as someone who is educating the future lawyers of, the world here, they must leave this building with some sense of what it is to be trauma-informed in their provision of legal services. And I don't care if their client is a corporation or a rape victim. I think it's incumbent upon us as a legal community to understand trauma in the brain because the practice of law is a human service. A human being is representing that corporation. or the NFL, right? It's still a person. And I think it was really important, or it should be important in the future, for investigators of cases with allegations like this to not just be able to use, yes, I'm trauma-informed, properly in a sentence, but to actually understand the 5 core values of what trauma-informed care really are and fold them into their provision of legal services. So, that could have been another reason why these women didn't want to talk, because they'd already been, for lack of a better way of saying it, beat up by these investigators, and they didn't want to go through it again.
Thank you. We could talk about this topic all day. It's extremely interesting, and there's so many different avenues to look at it. At this point, we're going to open up the floor for questions, if anyone has one.
And while you're thinking of your questions, I'll show you the other side of the public reaction. Again, clips off of social media.
Question in the back? Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, are there resources for those of us who are older to learn about trauma-informed, care of our clients?
Hi, I'm your resource. I would love to, do another CLE. Kim, we have a new CLE in the pipeline now, trauma, but we do it as a CLE. We do it here at the law school. We can adapt it to, any type of audience, but we've done it before, and I would be happy to do another CLE on how to be trauma-informed in your provision of legal services. I've taught it to all the faculty here. All of my students get it, I think, ad nauseum from me. And I think that those sort of old dogs in the field really could use a refresher, even if you've had a trauma-informed CLE. So I'd be happy to do it. I'll come to your firm and do it myself.
You said that the investigators ask possible questions because they aren't trauma-informed, and that some of those people don't want to testify later because of what happened in the investigation. Do you also think it's possible that some of this investigation, the way it's set up, is intentional?
Of course it's intentional. Absolutely. I mean, this is investigations across any space, right? Corporate investigations, internal investigations. The investigators work for who've hired them, right? And it was intentional. And be protective. In my opinion, again, we tried and we dug around. I think the investigation report was something like 215 pages. I was unable to come up with a copy of it anywhere. I would have loved to have read it. But of course it was intentional.
What I'd be interested in knowing, and we'll never find out probably, is what research, what investigation, what questions did the Cleveland Browns ask in all of this? I almost think they didn't ask much at all to have some plausible deniability, because they're making this massive investment, massive commitment. They probably didn't want to know much. And we can make that second CLE word Cleveland. Their press conferences were very hidden, very non-responsive about Watson's behavior. Talked about second chances, as always happens, but obviously with 26, 30, 50, 60 women, second chances doesn't seem like the right answer in that vein. Yes, ma'am.
Discussing the NFL and making comparisons to other NFL cases, how do the other leagues and their responses to similar cases measure up? Are there processes when there's an allegation like this against one of their athletes?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was asking about other leagues. And what I've researched and found over the years up until this year, the NFL has been the most proactive about personal behavior. Commissioner Goodell has been the most forward-focused about personal conduct discipline over any of the other leagues. And when there has been domestic issues in other leagues, it's been, I wouldn't say swept under the rug, but lightly disciplined. That changed with baseball this year. As many of you know, following baseball, the pitcher Trevor Bauer is now serving not a 1 year, but a 2-year suspension, which is truly incredible discipline, nothing we've seen before. Now, there was actual violence, there was reported violence, there are pictures, there's the whole thing there, but that is under appeal at this moment. So in that case, this exceeds Watson by a great degree, but up until that point, we hadn't seen anything like this from any other league. Yes, sir.
In Scandinavian countries, if you're caught with a DUI, you pay a percentage of your net worth. It seems that the penalties, as you were saying, for an ordinary player would have been out of the league. Why shouldn't penalties be sort of proportional to the net worth or something like that in order to make something realistically a punishment and not something that somebody who got $45 million opposed to $45 million signing bonus can pay out $1 million and it really doesn't bother them.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something a lot of, not only we're asking, but other teams are asking. How can they basically manipulated the contract negotiation cycle for him to avoid financial penalty. So for people who don't know about contracts, the only money subject to suspension is salary. Now we can debate why or why not, but bonus is not subject to suspension. So Watson is scheduled to make $46 million this year. 45 of it they put in bonus. So only $1 million of it, his salary, is subject to suspension. With a 6-game suspension, that's about $350,000 out of $46 million. And of course, he has another $200 million coming to him that is, again, not subject to any suspension. There is a push to do exactly what you said based on this contract, that there should be not a way to avoid this. And again, you would think it'd be the team that wanted more suspension for behavior, but in this case, the team wanted less consequences because they wanted the player so bad, and it was a very competitive situation to get him. I think that's how they got him. He doesn't want to play in Cleveland. He's from the South. But he went for the money. He went for the contract. I doubt it.
Well,
But one thing I want to say real quickly is that it occurs to me that the same thing I talked about with Judge Robinson is part of his penalty. He cannot seek massage from anyone outside the team. But now we're in this strange case where he is suspended from the team and can have no contact from the team. So if he seeks massage now, theoretically, he has violated the terms of his suspension, because he can't get massage with the Browns now because he's suspended from the Browns. So the way I look at it is he can't have massage for 11 weeks.
And let's just be clear, I don't think he was going for massage.
Right. But now he has to, because team massage therapists are not playing that game.
Before we conclude today's CLE, I just want to ask you both for your final thoughts.
Okay. I just, a lot of people ask why the NFL didn't push it for a year. I think despite an internal arbitration system that we talk about in my sports law class all the time, and collective bargaining, keeping the situation in-house, there were rumors that, like Tom Brady in a different set of circumstances years ago, Deshaun Watson was going to take this out of the system and go to court, tie this up in court, and have us and the world talking about this months and months beyond even as the season went on. I don't think he'd win in court because Brady certainly didn't win. Judges are going to respect internal arbitration. They're not going to grant him what he wanted, but he would have gone to court. That was a reason, and I think they wanted to get the focus back on the field. We can debate that, why the NFL didn't push this farther to get him out for the full year. I think this is a bad look for a lot of people, but mostly the Cleveland Browns. I just don't. It's one thing, as I did when Green Bay. Listen, I signed players with some bad character, but they were not the face of the franchise. This guy is the face of the franchise. This is your guy, Cleveland, for 5 more years. And sure, he's going to say all the right things when he comes back, but this is a bad look for the NFL. And I understand the reasons they didn't, but I just don't see not pushing to get him off the field for at least a year, no matter what the blowback.
And I just want to conclude with a quote from the survivor who came forward first, Ashley. She said, "What do the actions of the NFL say to little girls who have suffered at the hands of someone perceived to have power? That it's not a big deal. So instead, I'll let my actions say something different to those same little girls. No matter how scary, big, or powerful someone may seem, they are just humans. And like all humans, we have the right to have our voices heard." So my hope is that your takeaway from today, if anyone approaches you to ask about this CLE, or if we're having conversations on Sundays during football season, that we remember that there are little girls out there and that they're human, and that we, as a society, and of course as lawyers, want a world that is safe for them.
One last thing before we conclude, we need one more CLE word from one of you.
Andrew stole my word, so I'll just give an easy one, exploitation.
Well, please give a hand to Professor Brandt and Professor Rhodes.